The hall was filled with the soft sound of shuffling papers, the creak of wooden chairs, and the faint buzz of whispers. It was a normal morning at the city's most respected music academy, a place where children from wealthy families came to chase the dream of becoming great musicians. But for one small boy standing near the door, it was not normal at all. His name was Eli, and he had never been in a place like this before. His clothes were simple, a little worn out from many washes. His shoes had tiny cracks at the edges, and his hands were rough, not like the soft, clean hands of the other children. He held a small piece of paper with trembling fingers. It was his audition number. His heart was beating fast, not just from excitement, but from fear. Eli had always loved the piano. He used to listen through the window of a cafe near his home, where a kind old man played every evening. The sound of those keys was magic to him. It made him forget hunger, forget the small, cold room he shared with his mother, forget the noise of the streets. He dreamed that one day he would sit in front of a real piano and make people feel the same magic he felt. Today was supposed to be that day. He had saved coins for months to take a bus to the academy. He didn't know anyone here. He didn't have fine clothes or a teacher's recommendation. He only had his heart and a dream. When he entered the room, the large grand piano stood in the middle like a royal throne. Its polished wood shone under the lights. Eli's eyes widened. He had never seen one so beautiful, so big. A man in a black suit, the director, sat at a desk watching with a serious expression. Around him were a few teachers and parents talking softly and sipping coffee. Eli walked toward the piano slowly, his small footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. His heart whispered just one touch, just once. He reached out his hand to gently feel the cool, smooth surface of the keys. But before his fingers could land, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Don't touch my piano, poor guy." The words struck like thunder. Eli froze. Everyone in the room turned their heads toward him. A few students giggled quietly. Someone whispered, "Look at his clothes." The director's eyes were cold. He leaned forward, glaring at the boy as if Eli had committed a crime. Eli's hand dropped to his side. His cheeks burned. He wanted to say something, to explain that he only wanted to play, not to harm anything, but no words came out. The laughter behind him grew louder, soft but painful. The director shook his head and sighed loudly. "You can't just walk in here and touch things you don't understand," he said. "Do you even know how much that piano costs?" Eli looked down at his shoes. He didn't know what to say. He just whispered almost to himself, "I'm sorry, sir." "I didn't mean—" "Enough," the director interrupted. "Stand over there and wait. Next." Eli stepped back quickly, his eyes fixed on the floor. He stood in the corner while another student took his place at the piano. A boy in a neat blue uniform wearing shiny shoes. The student smiled politely at the director and began playing a simple melody. The notes were clear, but they had no soul. Still, everyone nodded approvingly. Eli watched quietly, feeling something heavy build inside his chest. It wasn't just sadness, and it was a kind of fire. He knew he could play better than that, even without ever learning properly. He had listened to so many songs, memorized the rhythm, the flow of every note. But now, after being insulted, he wasn't sure he'd ever get the chance. As the performance ended, polite claps filled the air. Eli wiped his eyes quickly so no one would see the tears. A small smile from a kind-faced woman sitting near the door gave him a bit of comfort. Maybe she understood. Maybe she saw how much he wanted this. But the director didn't look at him again. He went back to writing something in his notebook, ignoring the small boy in the corner. Eli's thoughts started to wander. He remembered his mother's voice that morning. "Don't be afraid, Eli. If they let you play, just close your eyes and listen to your heart." He had promised her he would try his best. Now he felt he had failed before even starting. Still, something deep inside him refused to give up. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was love for music. But he stood straight again, looking at the piano. The words "don't touch my piano" echoed in his head. But instead of hurting him now, they started to push him forward. He didn't know how or when, but Eli promised himself silently, "One day, I'll play that piano and he'll listen." At that moment, the laughter and whispers faded in his mind. All he could hear was the sound of the piano in his memory, soft, warm, and full of life. Even though he had been humiliated in front of everyone, he held on to that sound, because that sound was his world, his truth. The director might have seen a poor boy, but what he didn't see was a heart full of music waiting to be heard. And though Eli didn't know it yet, That same man who had shouted at him would one day sit in silence, eyes wet with tears, listening to the boy he had once called poor guy play like a sorcerer. For now, though Eli stood quietly in that corner, holding his dream close like a secret, hurt, but not broken. After that painful moment in the academy hall, Eli walked out quietly and sat on the steps outside. The cold air brushed against his cheeks and he could still hear the director's angry voice echoing in his mind. "Don't touch my piano, poor guy." The words stayed with him like a wound that refused to close. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had dreamed of playing music. They looked small and ordinary, but inside them was a secret world, a world of sound, rhythm, and stories only he could hear. He rubbed his palms together slowly, remembering how the piano keys had felt under his fingers at the cafe near his home. That cafe was where everything began. Every evening, after finishing errands for his mother, Eli would sit outside the cafe window. The old pianist inside, a kind man named Mr. Rowan, played slow, beautiful pieces that floated out into the street. Eli never had money to go inside, but he didn't need to. The music reached him perfectly through the glass. At first, he just listened. But after weeks of listening, something strange happened. He started remembering the sounds. He would tap the rhythm on his knees, hum the melodies, and imagine where each note lived on the piano keys. He didn't have a piano, but he practiced on an old wooden box at home, pretending it was one. His mother used to watch him and smile. "You play with your heart," she said. "That's something no one can take away." One day, Mr. Rowan stepped outside the cafe and found Eli sitting there again, eyes closed, tapping away on his knees. He chuckled and asked, "You like the piano, don't you?" Eli opened his eyes quickly, nervous. "Yes, sir. It's the most beautiful thing in the world." The old man smiled kindly. "Come tomorrow morning. I'll show you something." Eli couldn't sleep that night. The next morning he arrived early. Mr. Rowan was waiting for him and opened the cafe door. "Come in," he said. "Let's see what those hands can do." That was the first time Eli ever touched a real piano. The moment his fingers touched the keys, it felt like meeting an old friend. Mr. Rowan played a few notes and told Eli to repeat them. To his surprise, Eli repeated them perfectly, even adding a small twist of his own. "You've got a good ear, boy," Mr. Rowan said, nodding with pride. "You hear music the way others breathe air." From that day, Eli came to the cafe every morning before school. Mr. Rowan didn't charge him anything. "Music should be shared, not sold," he said. They played simple tunes together, children's songs, folk melodies, small waltzes. But to Eli, they were like treasures. Sometimes customers would come in and listen. They would smile at the sight of the little boy and the old man playing side by side. Eli's favorite moment was when they played Moonlight Song. It was slow and full of emotion, and every time he played it, he could feel the world stop around him. But good things never lasted long. Mr. Rowan fell ill one winter and couldn't come to the cafe anymore. Before leaving, he called Eli and placed a small worn-out sheet of paper in his hands. "This is my favorite piece," he said softly. "Play it when you feel lost. It will always bring you back." Eli nodded, tears filling his eyes. He promised he would. After that, he had no one to guide him, but he kept practicing, tapping on tables, boxes, and sometimes broken keyboards people threw away. He learned just by listening, copying tunes from radios and the faint sound of music from neighbors' windows. Years passed that way. Eli grew better and better, though he had never owned a real piano. He started playing in small local events when someone lent him a keyboard. People began to notice. "That boy plays with his soul," they said. But without formal training, no big school would accept him. Then one day he saw a poster. "Music Academy Open Auditions, all are welcome." Those 3 words lit a fire inside him. He thought of his mother, of Mr. Rowan, and of all the years he had played in silence. He decided he would go, even if no one believed in him. He saved coins, skipped meals, and took long walks instead of bus rides to collect enough money to travel to the academy. When he finally reached, his heart was full of hope. But instead of applause or welcome, he was met with insult and laughter. That night, after the humiliation, Eli sat by the river near his home. The moonlight reflected on the water like piano keys. He closed his eyes and placed his fingers on his knees again. Slowly, he began to play the melody Mr. Rowan had taught him. Moonlight Song. The notes existed only in his mind, but they were perfect. He whispered to himself, "They can laugh, they can shout, but they can't stop the music inside me." And at that moment, Eli made a quiet promise he would not let that humiliation define him. He would find a way back to that piano, not for the director, not for the academy, but for himself, and for the old man who believed in him. The sound of invisible keys filled the air, carried by the night breeze. Somewhere far away, it felt like Mr. Rowan was listening and smiling again. After that night by the river, something inside Eli changed. He no longer felt like the same frightened boy who stood in the corner of the academy hall. The humiliation had hurt him deeply, but instead of breaking him, it had awakened a quiet strength he never knew he had. Every word, every laugh, every look of pity now burned in his memory, not as pain, but as fuel. The next morning, he woke before dawn. His mother was still asleep, wrapped in an old blanket. Eli stepped outside, feeling the chill of the early morning air. The world was silent except for the distant sound of a train passing. He closed his eyes and listened, not just to the world, but to the rhythm of it. He could hear the soft hum of life everywhere, like invisible music waiting to be found. He began practicing again, just as he had done when he was younger. He placed a row of bricks on the ground, each representing a piano key, and practiced finger movements on them. His mother watched one morning and asked softly, "Eli, why do you still do this?" He smiled shyly. "Because one day I'll touch a real piano again. And when I do, I want to be ready." She didn't answer, but her eyes filled with pride. Eli spent hours each day practicing on invisible keys. Sometimes he would go to the cafe where Mr. Rowan used to play, even though it was now closed. He would sit on the steps, close his eyes, and imagine the music. The memory of those melodies was like a map in his head. Every note still alive, every pause still meaningful. A few weeks later, fate gave him a small miracle. While walking through the market, Eli heard a familiar sound. Someone was playing an old piano inside a small repair shop. He stopped in front of the window and saw a dusty upright piano with a few broken keys. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with thick glasses, noticed him staring. "Do you play?" the man asked. Eli hesitated. "A little, but I've never had my own piano." The man chuckled. "This one doesn't belong to anyone right now. It's too damaged to sell. You can use it for practice if you don't mind the broken notes." Eli's eyes widened in disbelief. "Really?" The man nodded. "Just don't break it any further." That day changed everything. Eli came every afternoon after finishing his errands. The shop smelled of wood polish and old metal, and the piano sat near the window where sunlight poured in. Half the keys didn't work, but he didn't care. To him, it was heaven. At first, his playing was clumsy. He was nervous, his fingers stiff. But soon his confidence grew. He played with his eyes shut, letting the music guide him instead of fear. The broken keys forced him to adapt. He learned to skip them, improvise, and create new melodies around the missing sounds. In a strange way, the flaws made him better. People began to stop outside the shop to listen. Children, vendors, even travelers passing by. They all gathered to hear the boy with the calm face and closed eyes playing the broken piano. Some dropped coins on the windowsill. Others just smiled, moved by the emotion in his music. One afternoon, as he played Mr. Rowan's Moonlight Song, the same melody he had practiced by the river, an old woman standing nearby whispered to someone, "He plays like he's telling a story." Eli didn't hear her, but he felt something inside him open, the same magic that used to live in Mr. Rowan's music. His hands moved freely, his heart full of warmth. Weeks passed, and the shopkeeper began to notice more people stopping to listen. One day he said, "Eli, you bring customers without even trying. You should perform someday." Eli laughed softly. "They wouldn't let me. I don't belong to a music school." The shopkeeper smiled. "Talent doesn't ask for permission." That night, Eli thought about those words. He knew he couldn't afford lessons or fancy clothes, but maybe that didn't matter. Maybe music itself was his teacher. Every note he played carried pieces of his past. The loneliness, the laughter, the hunger, the small victories. His fingers told stories even he couldn't put into words. Sometimes when he played, he imagined standing in that grand academy hall again. But this time, no one laughed. No one shouted. The same director who had insulted him now sat silently in the front row listening. and when Eli finished, the man would rise and whisper, "You proved me wrong." It was just a dream, but it gave him purpose. Months went by. The old piano in the shop finally broke completely. The strings snapped and the sound died. Eli stood before it in silence, then gently touched the keys one last time. "Thank you," he whispered. The shopkeeper, moved by the boy's devotion, gave him a letter. "There's a music contest next month," he said. "Winners get a scholarship to study at the National Academy. You should try." Eli held the letter tightly. The name of the academy made his heart skip. It was the same one where he had been humiliated months ago. That night he sat by the window looking up at the stars. His hands rested on the table, moving softly as if playing an invisible tune. He whispered to himself, "I'll go back. But this time I won't go to ask for a chance. I'll go to earn it." The moonlight fell on his face, and for the first time he smiled with quiet determination. The boy who once stood in shame was gone. What remained was a musician, one who had learned, in the hardest way possible, that true music isn't about fame or approval. It's about heart, and Eli's heart was ready to play. Again. The day of the contest arrived, and the same academy that had once turned Eli away now buzzed with excitement. Banners hung from the ceiling. Students in neat uniforms hurried down the halls, and parents filled the rows of chairs in the performance hall. The grand piano stood at the center of the stage, shining under the golden light like a throne waiting for its rightful ruler. Eli stood backstage, holding the same letter the shopkeeper had given him weeks ago. His heart pounded, but not from fear, from anticipation. He looked down at his worn shoes, the same pair he had worn on the day of his humiliation. They reminded him where he came from and why he was there. "Contestant number 17, a voice called. Eli took a deep breath. He stepped out from behind the curtain, his small frame swallowed by the size of the stage. A wave of whispers rippled through the audience. Some people frowned. A few students smirked, recognizing him, the poor boy who had been shouted at months ago. At the judges' table sat the director, the same man who had once yelled, "Don't touch my piano, poor guy." He looked at Eli, eyes narrowing in surprise. Eli bowed politely, then sat on the piano bench. His hands hovered over the keys. For a moment he hesitated. The memory of that day came rushing back, the humiliation, the laughter, the pain. His chest tightened. Then he remembered his mother's words. "If they let you play, close your eyes and listen to your heart." So he did. He took another deep breath, closed his eyes, and let his fingers touch the keys. The first note came out soft, trembling, but pure. Then another, and another. The melody began to form, slow and gentle, like a whisper growing into a song. He played Moonlight Song, the one Mr. Rowan had taught him, the one that had lived in his soul since childhood. At first, the audience didn't understand. His technique was not polished like the other students. His rhythm was different, free, flowing, full of emotion. But within seconds, the hall began to change. The air felt heavier, charged with feeling. Every note seemed to tell a story of pain, struggle, hope, and love. Eli's eyes remained shut as his fingers danced across the keys. The sound rose and fell like waves on the ocean, soft one moment, powerful the next. Each movement of his hands carried years of quiet practice, tapping on bricks, on boxes, on air. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was his voice, his truth. People in the audience stopped whispering. The laughter faded. Even the director, who had been sitting stiffly, leaned forward, his expression softening. Something about the boy's playing was different. Raw, honest, untrained, but alive. Eli's body swayed slightly as he played. He wasn't thinking about the judges, the crowd, or the prize. He was thinking about the night by the river, about Mr. Rowan's gentle smile, about the sound of broken keys in the repair shop. All those memories wove themselves into the music. The final part of the song came, a slow, heartbreaking melody that faded like a sigh. Eli pressed the last key gently, and the sound lingered in the air before dissolving into silence. For a moment, no one moved. The entire hall was frozen. You could have heard a pin drop. Then slowly the audience began to clap, softly at first, then louder until the sound filled the room like thunder. Some people stood up, others wiped their eyes. Eli opened his eyes slowly as if waking from a dream. The light seemed brighter now. He looked around, dazed, not sure what was happening, and then his gaze met the director's. The man's eyes were wet. He didn't look angry anymore. Instead, he looked human, vulnerable. For the first time, Eli saw something like regret in his face. The director stood up and began to clap too, slowly with real emotion. And to clap too, slowly with real emotion. Eli didn't know how to react. He simply bowed his head, shy and humble as ever. After the contest ended, the judges discussed quietly among themselves. The audience continued to buzz, talking about the boy who played with his eyes shut. When the results were finally announced, Eli didn't even hear his name at first. The crowd's cheers drowned out the words. He had won. But more important than the prize was the silence that came before the applause. That moment when his music had reached everyone, even the one who had once rejected him. As Eli walked off the stage, the director approached him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The director finally said softly, "You played beautifully." Eli smiled faintly. "Thank you, sir." The man hesitated, then added, "I was wrong about you." Eli looked at him with calm eyes and said, "It's okay. You just didn't hear me before." The director blinked, then nodded slowly. As Eli left the hall, the sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting a warm glow on the floor. He walked with quiet steps, holding the certificate in his hands. But it wasn't the paper that mattered. It was what it meant. He had finally played. He had turned his humiliation into harmony, his pain into purpose. And as he stepped outside, a small smile appeared on his face. Somewhere he felt Mr. Rowan's voice whisper through the wind, "You did it, my boy." That evening, when Eli reached home, his mother was waiting by the door. She didn't need to ask how it went. The light in his eyes told her everything. She hugged him tightly. And for the first time in a long time, Eli allowed himself to cry. Not from sadness, but from joy. The boy who once stood in the corner, afraid to touch the piano, had finally played with his eyes shut. And the whole world had listened. The hall was still buzzing long after Eli's performance ended. The sound of his music seemed to linger in the air like a spell that refused to break. People were talking excitedly. Some said they had never seen a performance so emotional. Others whispered that the boy had something magical in his touch. Even the echo of his final note seemed alive, dancing faintly through the corridors of the academy. Eli stood behind the stage curtain, trying to catch his breath. His hands were still shaking, not from fear but from the power of what he had just done. He looked down at his fingers, the same fingers that had once trembled in shame, the same ones that had practiced on bricks and wooden boxes. Now those same fingers had made hundreds of people silent. He didn't quite understand it. All he knew was that something had changed, inside him, and in everyone who had listened. The director walked toward him slowly, holding a glass of water. He looked different now, softer, smaller somehow, stripped of the pride that once made him seem untouchable. He handed Eli the glass and said quietly, "You play like no one I've ever heard." Eli took the water with both hands, unsure what to say. He only managed a shy smile. The director went on, his voice heavy with something that sounded like guilt. "When you first came here, I thought you didn't belong. I thought music was only for those who could afford it, those who looked the part. But when you played today," he paused, his throat tightening, "I realized music doesn't belong to the rich or the talented. It belongs to the soul that feels it the deepest. And boy, your soul is full of it." Eli didn't know how to respond. The man who had once shouted at him now spoke like a student before his teacher. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then the director added softly, "You played like a sorcerer, with your eyes shut, as if the piano was obeying you." Eli looked up, his eyes warm but humble. "I just listened," he said quietly. "The piano already knows the song. I just helped it speak." The director blinked, taken aback by the boy's words. He nodded slowly. "You have a gift, Eli. Don't ever stop." Soon the audience began to file out, but the story of the boy who played with his eyes closed spread like wildfire. Teachers, parents, and even other contestants came to congratulate him. Some asked where he had learned to play. Others just wanted to shake his hand. Eli answered each one kindly, though he still couldn't believe what was happening. As he stepped outside the hall, the evening light painted the sky orange and gold. The wind was cool, carrying the distant hum of city sounds. For the first time, Eli felt truly free. He sat on the academy steps, holding the small golden medal he had won. It wasn't large or shiny, but it meant everything. While he sat there, a young boy from the competition came over. He was wearing a neat uniform and had a proud posture, but his eyes were filled with respect. "Hey," the boy said softly, I used to think people like you couldn't really play. But now I know better." Eli smiled. "Anyone can play," he said. "You just have to feel it, not show it." The boy nodded and walked away quietly. As the last of the crowd disappeared, Eli looked back through the tall academy windows. The grand piano still stood on the stage, shining faintly under the fading lights. He imagined the moment again. The silence before the applause, the magic of the melody, the sound that had filled every corner of the room. It felt unreal. He whispered softly to himself, "Thank you, Mr. Rowan," because deep down, Eli knew the music wasn't just his. It was a gift. One passed from a kind old man to a boy who listened through windows, who learned from echoes, who never gave up even when the world told him he wasn't good enough. That night, when Eli reached home, his mother was waiting with open arms. She had heard everything from a neighbor who had attended the contest. She hugged him tightly and said through tears, "I knew you could do it, Eli. I always knew." Eli smiled against her shoulder. "It was like he was there, Mom. Mr. Rowan, I could feel him." His mother pulled back and cupped his face. "He'd be proud of you, my son." "I am too." They sat together at the small table as he placed the medal in front of her. "It's yours too," he said. "You're the reason I kept playing." The next morning, news spread fast. The academy's director himself called Eli's home. He offered Eli a full scholarship, free lessons, free tuition, and a promise. "You'll play our piano again? Anytime you want." When Eli arrived at the academy a week later, the students who once laughed now greeted him with respect. The director welcomed him personally, and as Eli entered the hall, he looked at the piano once more. This time there was no fear, no hesitation. He placed his fingers on the keys, closed his eyes, and began to play again. The notes filled the air like sunlight, bright, warm, and full of emotion. Outside the hall, people passing by stopped to listen. Some smiled, some cried. No one knew his full story, but everyone could feel it in the sound. And from that day on, the piano that once rejected him became his own. Not by ownership, but by soul. Every key, every note, every echo belonged to him. And whenever Eli played, the world listened, as if the sorcerer had returned once more, eyes shut, heart open, turning silence into music that would never fade. The morning after the contest, the academy felt different. The grand halls that once seemed so cold and unwelcoming now carried a new kind of silence, one filled with respect. People who used to ignore Eli now smiled when they saw him. Some nodded politely, others whispered his name in amazement as he passed. "That's the boy," they said, "the one who played with his eyes closed." But Eli didn't walk with pride or arrogance. He moved quietly, his head slightly bowed as if afraid to disturb the magic that had just entered his life. He didn't want fame. He just wanted to play. The director had kept his word. He called Eli to his office that morning and handed him a small card. "This is your enrollment letter," he said. "You are now a student of this academy, full scholarship." Eli took the card carefully, his fingers trembling. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. The director looked at him for a long time. "No," he said softly. "Thank you. You reminded me why I loved music in the first place." That sentence stayed in Eli's heart forever. From that day on, Eli's life began to change. Every morning, he arrived early to practice before the other students. He sat at the same grand piano that once had been forbidden to him, the same one that had started his humiliation. Now when his fingers touched the keys, it felt like an old wound had healed. Sometimes the director stood quietly in the corner of the hall, watching him. He never interrupted. He didn't give instructions or corrections. He just listened, silently, almost in awe. There was something sacred about the way Eli played. It wasn't about technique or perfection. It was about truth. Every note told a story. The other students began to notice too. Some of them, curious and inspired, started sitting near Eli during practice. They didn't laugh anymore. Instead, they asked questions. "How do you make it sound so real?" one boy asked. "It feels like it's talking." Eli smiled softly and said, "Because I listen before I play. The piano always whispers first." Days turned into weeks and the academy buzzed with stories about him. But even with all the admiration, Eli stayed humble. He still wore his old clothes. He still helped his mother in the evenings. And when he walked home after practice, he still stopped by the closed cafe, sitting on the same step where he had once listened to Mr. Rowan's music. He would sit there in the quiet, close his eyes, and imagine the old man's voice saying, "You've come far, Eli." One afternoon, while Eli was practicing, the director invite. Eli was practicing, the director invite. One afternoon, while Eli was practicing, the director invited a group of guests, donors, musicians, and reporters, to listen. He didn't tell Eli about it. He just wanted them to hear what true emotion sounded like. Eli sat at the piano as usual, eyes closed, unaware that half the academy was watching. He began to play a piece of his own, one he had written secretly. It was soft and deep, like the sound of a memory. It carried the pain of his past, the warmth of his mother's love, and the lessons of Mr. Rowan. The notes floated through the hall like light through water, gentle, shimmering, and alive. When he finished, there was silence again. No one moved. Then came applause, long, powerful, filled with emotion. Some people had tears in their eyes. The director stood in the back, his heart swelling with pride. He whispered under his breath, "This is what music is meant to be." Later that evening, the director called Eli to his office once more. "Do you know who was here today?" he asked. Eli shook his head. "People from the National Conservatory," the director said. "They want to hear you again. They think you could represent the country in the upcoming Youth Music Festival." Eli's eyes widened. "Me, but I'm just a student." The director smiled. "You're not just anything, Eli. You're proof that music doesn't care where you come from, only where your heart leads you." That night, Eli walked home under the stars. The city lights shimmered on the wet streets, and for the first time, he felt that the world was opening its arms to him. When he reached home, his mother was sitting by the window, mending his shirt. "How was your day, my son?" she asked. Eli smiled and placed his hands gently on hers. "It was like the piano spoke for me again, Mama, and people finally listened." She looked at him with tearful eyes. "You've always had a gift, Eli, but what makes it special is your heart." They sat together quietly, listening to the sounds of the night. A soft breeze moved through the window, carrying the faint hum of distant city music. As Eli looked up at the stars, he thought of the path he had walked, from the corner of humiliation to the center of the stage. He realized something. The silence after his music ended was not emptiness. It was peace. It was connection. It was the world listening, truly listening, for the first time. In that silence lived every lesson, every tear, every dream. Eli smiled softly, whispering to himself, "I didn't need to touch the piano to belong. I just needed to believe I could." And from that moment on, every time he sat before those shining keys, eyes closed, heart open, he played not to impress, but to heal. The silence after his songs became his signature. It was the world catching its breath, held captive by the sorcerer who played with his eyes shut, the boy who turned pain into music, and silence into love. Weeks turned into months, and Eli's name began to spread beyond the academy walls. Teachers from other schools came to watch him play. Newspapers wrote small articles calling him the boy with the closed eyes. People described his performances as something between magic and prayer, too honest to be called perfect, too emotional to be called ordinary. But fame never reached Eli's heart. He still woke up early every morning, helped his mother with chores, and carried his small lunch to the academy. He still walked past the same cafe where Mr. Rowan once played, pausing to listen to the wind as if it carried invisible music. One morning, as he sat at the piano, the director entered quietly. He waited until Eli finished the piece he was practicing. When Eli opened his eyes, the director said, "Pack your things, Eli, you're going to the Capitol." "The Capitol?" Eli repeated, confused. "The National Youth Music Festival," the director said with a smile. "You've been selected to perform. You'll be representing our academy." Eli froze. His hands trembled slightly. The festival was famous across the country, the biggest stage a young musician could dream of. Only the best were chosen, and now his name was among them. He nodded slowly, trying to hide his nervousness. "I'll do my best, sir." The director placed a hand on his shoulder. "You already have. The following weeks were filled with preparation. The academy arranged for him to travel by train with a few teachers. His mother packed his bag carefully, slipping in a small folded note that said, "Play with your heart, my son. The rest will follow." When the day arrived, Eli boarded the train. It was his first time leaving his town. As the train moved, he looked out the window, watching the fields and rivers pass by like moving paintings. He thought about Mr. Rowan, about the repair shop's broken piano, about the day he was shouted at in this very academy, and how far he had come since then. When he reached the capital, everything looked enormous. The tall buildings, the lights, the crowds. The festival hall was even grander than he imagined. It had red velvet curtains, crystal chandeliers, and a piano so shiny it looked like a mirror. Eli was the youngest contestant there. The others wore expensive suits and carried sheet music folders. He had no folder, only a small pocket-sized piece of paper, the same one Mr. Rowan had given him years ago, with the notes of Moonlight Song. When his turn came, Eli walked onto the stage slowly. Thousands of eyes followed him. The hall fell silent. He could hear his heartbeat echoing in his ears. He sat at the piano and took a deep breath. For a moment he felt small again, like the boy who stood trembling in front of the director months ago. But then he remembered his promise, to play for his heart, not for applause. He closed his eyes. The first note rang out, soft and trembling like a whisper in the dark. Then another and another. The melody rose like a bird taking flight. He didn't need to see the keys, and he felt them. His hands moved naturally, flowing with the rhythm of memory and emotion. The audience listened in complete silence. Every note seemed to tell them something about their own lives, their hopes, their regrets, their forgotten dreams. Eli's music didn't just sound beautiful. It felt alive. It carried truth. Halfway through the piece, something extraordinary happened. The lights dimmed slightly and a single spotlight fell on Eli. The glow reflected off the piano surface, and it looked as if his fingers were painting with light. He swayed gently, completely lost in the music. When he reached the final part, the melody softened, turning almost into a whisper. His fingers lingered on the last note, holding it like a heartbeat before letting it go. The sound faded, and silence took over. The hall was still. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the first clap came, then another. And suddenly the hall erupted in applause so thunderous that Eli flinched in surprise. People stood cheering, crying, shouting his name. Some even waved their programs in the air. Eli didn't know what to do. He simply bowed, his face glowing with quiet joy. Backstage, the director was waiting for him. He didn't say a word. He just hugged Eli tightly, something he had never done before. "You didn't just play," he whispered. "You made them feel." Eli smiled. "I just closed my eyes," he said softly, "like always." Later that evening, after the festival ended, Eli sat outside the hall under a streetlight. He took out Mr. Rowan's note and unfolded it carefully. The paper was old and faded, but the handwritten notes were still clear. He whispered, "I did it. Mr. Rowan, you said this song would bring me back when I was lost, and it did." The night breeze carried the faint hum of music from the open windows of the festival hall. Eli looked up at the stars, and for the first time he felt completely at peace. He didn't need trophies or headlines. He didn't need people to call him a genius. What mattered was that he had told his story, not in words but in music. The boy who once wasn't allowed to touch the piano had now played before the whole world. And when he did, he played not for fame but for every person who had ever been told, "You don't belong here," because he knew the truth now. Sometimes the greatest music is born not from comfort, but from courage. And Eli's courage had turned silence into a symphony. The morning after the festival felt like a dream that refused to fade. Sunlight streamed through the window of Eli's small hotel room, warming his face as he slowly woke up. For a moment he thought he was still on stage, still hearing the applause echoing around him. But when he opened his eyes, there was only the soft hum of the city outside, and the gentle sound of his heartbeat, calm and steady. He sat up slowly, realizing that everything had changed. The night before, he had been just a boy who loved music. Now he was something else, and not famous, not rich, but heard. For the first time in his life, people had listened to him, really listened. As he packed his things, there was a knock at the door. When he opened it, he found the academy's director standing there holding a newspaper. His usual stern expression had been replaced by something warm, almost proud. "Good morning, Eli," he said. "You might want to see this," he said. "You might want to see this." Eli took the newspaper carefully. His picture was on the front page, a photo of him sitting at the piano, eyes closed, hands frozen in midair as if casting a spell. The headline read, "The Boy Who Played Like a Sorcerer, a Melody That Stole Every Heart." Eli smiled shyly, his ears turning red. "They make it sound like magic," he said. The director chuckled softly. "It was magic, Eli. What you did last night, it wasn't just music. It was a miracle." Eli didn't answer right away. He folded the paper neatly and placed it in his bag. "It wasn't me, sir," he said quietly. "It was the song. It always finds a way to speak." The director nodded. "And you let it." On the journey home, Eli stared out of the train window, watching the fields rush past. Everything looked brighter. The sky, the trees, even the distant mountains. Yet deep down he felt the same calm boy who used to sit outside a cafe window, listening to a stranger's piano. When he reached home, his mother was waiting at the station. She had worn her best dress and was holding a small bunch of flowers, daisies from their backyard. As soon as she saw him, her eyes filled with tears. "My boy," she whispered, hugging him tightly. "You did it." Eli smiled against her shoulder. "I played for you, Mama, and for him." She nodded, understanding without needing to ask who him was. In the following days, people from the town came to visit their small house. Some brought gifts, others just words of admiration. But Eli remained humble, thanking everyone gently, smiling shyly when they called him the prodigy. The academy honored him with a small concert in his name. The hall was full. Students, teachers, guests, and even children from poor neighborhoods who had been given free entry. Eli walked onto the stage with quiet steps, no longer afraid. Before playing, he spoke softly into the microphone. "When I was little, I wasn't allowed to touch this piano. I thought that meant I didn't belong here. But I learned something. Sometimes life doesn't stop you because you're not ready. It stops you so you can become ready." He paused, smiling gently. "So tonight, I'll play not to prove anything, but to thank everyone who once told me I couldn't, because they helped me learn that music doesn't come from pride, it comes from love." Then he sat down, closed his eyes, and began to play. This time, the song was not sad. It was full of light, bright, warm, and alive. Each note seemed to glow in the air. The melody was hopeful, carrying gratitude instead of pain. The audience didn't just hear it. They felt it in their hearts. Halfway through, Eli imagined Mr. Rowan standing behind him, smiling, nodding to the rhythm. He imagined his mother sitting in the front row, her eyes full of tears but her heart full of joy. He imagined the director listening quietly, proud of the boy he had once misjudged. When the final note faded, Eli kept his eyes closed for a long moment. The hall was silent again, that same deep, magical silence that had followed him everywhere he played. Then slowly the applause began, gentle at first, then powerful and endless. But this time Eli didn't bow right away. He smiled softly, whispered under his breath, "Thank you," and looked up toward the ceiling as if the music itself was listening. After the concert, the director approached him once more. "Eli," he said, "you've given this place something I can't put into words." Eli smiled. "Then don't put it into words," he replied. "Just listen." The man nodded, his eyes shining. "Always." Years later, people still talked about that night, about the boy who closed his eyes and made the world stop. Some called him a genius, some a miracle, and some simply Eli, the sorcerer of the piano. But to Eli, he was just the same boy who had once been told not to touch the piano. The same boy who found his voice in silence, and every time he sat before the keys, he still closed his eyes, not to hide from the world, but to see it better. Because for him, music wasn't about being seen. It was about making others feel, and that, he believed, was the truest magic of all.